The Lost Generation. The Lost Generation, a group that lived over a century ago, shares striking similarities with today's world. Growing up as a young man or woman during this time meant facing war, a pandemic, economic hardship, and evolving social conditions. World War I was devastating for this generation, with over 70 million people mobilized, 8.5 million killed, 21 million wounded, and an additional 2 million soldiers lost to disease. The Spanish flu pandemic of 1918 to 1920 compounded these struggles, claiming an estimated 17 to 50 million lives, with some reports suggesting up to 100 million. After the war and the pandemic, the global economy faced severe turmoil, eventually leading to the Great Depression in the 1930s. This period was marked by high unemployment, widespread poverty, and a pervasive sense of despair. The Greatest Generation. The Greatest Generation, also known as the World War II generation, is remembered for its heroism, technological advancements, and contributions to an era of prosperity. Growing up during this time meant witnessing the rise of groundbreaking inventions such as the radio, telephone, and automobile, which became central to daily life. Culturally, this period was marked by a flourishing of literature, art, music, and cinema, ushering in the golden age of Hollywood. Gangster films, musicals, comedies, and monster movies drew massive audiences, while comic books featuring iconic characters like Superman and Batman also gained immense popularity. In music, genres like jazz, blues, gospel, folk, and swing became dominant, shaping the American soundscape. The radio played a pivotal role in uniting the country, with millions tuning in to listen to President Roosevelt's famous fireside chats and keeping up with current events in an unprecedented way. During World War II, 16 million Americans served, the majority being from the Greatest Generation. Of these, 38.8% volunteered, while 61.2% were drafted, serving an average of 33 months. The war resulted in approximately 671,000 U.S. casualties. As of 2023, nearly 120,000 Americans who served in World War II are still alive, preserving the legacy of a generation that helped shape the modern world. The Silent Generation. The Silent Generation grew up during a time when their parents witnessed the fall of Nazism and the rise of communism as a new global threat. As children of this era came of age after World War II, they faced a devastated social order. The Soviet Union's betrayal of America's post-war agreements set the stage for a prolonged period of geopolitical tension that would last the next 50 years. Unlike previous generations who actively fought to change the system, the Silent Generation focused on working within the existing framework. They adopted a keep-your-head-down mentality, emphasizing hard work and stability. This generation was heavily influenced by the golden age of radio, the rise of trade unions, the development of transatlantic flight, and the discovery of penicillin, all significant advancements during their formative years. Members of the Silent Generation tended to marry and have children at a young age, reflecting their cautious and risk-averse attitudes. However, this approach was later criticized by more radical generations, who sought greater social and political change. Despite the criticisms, the Silent Generation is remembered for their resilience and dedication to building a stable and prosperous society in the post-war era. Baby Boomers. The Baby Boomers, perhaps the most famous modern generation, emerged during one of the most dynamic periods in American history. Born in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, they are known for their high birth rates, with 76 million births occurring during this time. This baby boom was fueled by a strong post-war economy, where Americans felt confident in their ability to support large families. Boomers significantly shaped the economy, becoming a key marketing demographic for products tailored to their age group, from toys to music records. Many items once considered luxuries, like washing machines, dishwashers, refrigerators, and telephones, became widely accessible, allowing the average American to enjoy a lifestyle that rivaled the upper class of previous generations. Technological advances, including plastics, television, magnetic tape, transistors, integrated circuits, and lasers, played a crucial role in improving the standard of living. Culturally, this period saw a huge surge in creativity, especially in the music industry. Bands and artists like the Beatles, Bob Dylan, and the Rolling Stones became immensely popular, reflecting the era's cultural transformation. However, it wasn't all optimism. Political discourse around major issues like the sexual revolution, civil rights, nuclear weapons, ethnocultural diversity, and environmental protection became highly charged and frequently debated. The baby boomers were a more radical generation, with many favoring left-leaning social causes and challenging conservative, traditionalist views. This cultural and political divide often manifested in protests, many of which became increasingly violent as opposition to the Vietnam War grew. As the war dragged on, the U.S. became more divided, and public distrust in the government steadily increased. Generation X. Generation X, often called the latchkey generation, grew up during a time when many children returned home from school to an empty house, often needing a key to let themselves in. This was due to a rise in free-range parenting, increasing divorce rates, more mothers joining the workforce, and a growing reliance on childcare outside the home. As young adults, Gen Xers were dubbed the MTV generation, often characterized as cynical, disaffected, and sometimes labeled as slackers. Unlike the baby boomers, Generation X experienced declining birth rates, influenced by the introduction of the birth control pill in 1960 and the legalization of abortion in 1973. However, demographic changes following the 1965 Immigration Act brought cultural and ethnic diversity, making Generation X in America more diverse than any previous generation. Gen X's cultural identity was strongly shaped by music, with the rise of alternative rock, hip-hop, punk, post-punk, and heavy metal bands during the 1980s and 90s. Technological innovation also surged, with companies like Apple, Commodore, and Atari leading the home computing revolution. Video games became a cultural phenomenon, with arcade gaming booming in the 1970s and 80s, followed by the rise of home consoles from companies like Nintendo and Atari. Compared to boomers, Gen Xers were more likely to pursue higher education, with college enrollment becoming increasingly common. Individualism and entrepreneurialism were defining traits of this generation, which would go on to create major companies and platforms such as Google, Wikipedia, Amazon, and YouTube, profoundly shaping the digital age of the late 1990s and early 2000s. Millennials, Generation Y. Millennials, or Generation Y, were the first to grow up with the internet, mobile technology, and social media, making them the first truly global generation, connected to the entire world. However, they are often described as the unluckiest generation due to slower economic growth and financial challenges compared to previous generations. Millennials have faced significant burdens such as high student debt and rising childcare costs, which have affected their financial stability. Born during a time of declining fertility rates, millennials are having fewer children than their predecessors. They have also been noted for engaging in less sexual activity than earlier generations at the same age. Economic difficulties have hit this generation hard, with the U.S. unemployment rate peaking at 19% in 2010, contributing to increased youth poverty, unemployment, and a rise in millennials living with their parents. In terms of religion, millennials are less likely to be religious than previous generations, though many identify as spiritual. This generation also lived through 9/11s, which profoundly changed American culture and sparked the war on terrorism. Despite these challenges, millennials are recognized for their digital fluency, diverse perspectives, and strong sense of social consciousness. Growing up in an era where global news and information can be accessed instantly, they are socially and politically active, using their voices to advocate for change. And despite facing economic hardships, more than 80% of millennials feel confident in their financial future, reflecting their generally positive outlook on life. Generation Z, Zoomers. Generation Z, or Zoomers, share similarities with millennials but differ in key ways. While millennials were introduced to the internet and smartphones during their formative years, experiencing rapid technological change, Zoomers were born into a fully digital world. This generation grew up in the midst of social justice movements, the rise of a new and divisive form of American politics, marked by figures like Donald Trump, the Black Lives Matter protests, and the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic, in particular, disrupted much of their high school and college experiences due to lockdowns. Zoomers have also come of age in a world dominated by the attention economy, with platforms like YouTube and TikTok reshaping how information is consumed and distributed. Algorithms on these apps not only determine what content is shared, but also play a role in shaping cultural trends. Even memes, once lighthearted jokes pioneered by millennials, have evolved into powerful tools for spreading and popularizing ideas. Individualism is a defining trait of Generation Z, as they embrace the entrepreneurial spirit once associated with Gen X. The internet has revolutionized work, with freelancing and gig economy jobs becoming more common. The pandemic also shifted where work takes place, with remote work becoming the norm. Social media has changed the cultural landscape further, allowing individuals to gain as much influence as traditional media outlets, with content creators and influencers becoming more desirable careers than traditional jobs. Culturally, Zoomers grew up with shows like **SpongeBob SquarePants**, which has had a lasting impact on their humor and social identity. As a generation deeply shaped by digital technology, political movements, and economic shifts, Zoomers are redefining how we interact with the world. Generation Alpha, the youngest generation, is still largely a mystery, as their future is difficult to predict. Raised mostly by millennials, they are sometimes referred to as the pandemic generation, having experienced the global pandemic during their early childhood. This generation is growing up in a world heavily shaped by technological advancements, which have transformed education and entertainment. Often called iPad kids, Generation Alpha spends less time with their parents compared to previous generations, instead leading more independent and self-directed lives with the internet as a constant presence. With the internet now over 20 years old, technology plays an even more significant role in their upbringing than it did for earlier generations. They are expected to reach adulthood in the 2030s, and according to the United Nations, the global average lifespan for this generation is projected to be 83 years. Looking ahead, Generation Alpha is predicted to face challenges like mental health issues, the spread of misinformation, and political polarization. However, the full scope of what the future holds for them remains uncertain.